Good morning, everybody. We ask that you take your seats so we can begin. This is a wonderful occasion. It's our culmination of our breakfast series, and we're delighted to have so many people here today. What is this? The Rebney dinner. This is like... Okay, good morning, everybody. Good morning. There are plenty of seats, and I hope people will... We're delighted to have so many people here today. This is a wonderful breakfast that we look forward to every year, our Civic Fame Breakfast. This is the 154th City Law Breakfast, and I'd like to thank at the beginning here the founding sponsors, first Greenberg Traurig, Ed Wallace, and thank you, and you. Con Edison, also a founding sponsor, and Verizon, three founding sponsors. And I also want to thank all of the Gold Star people with the Gold Star on your nameplate, because those are the people who voluntarily contributed to support these breakfasts. Also, we have the annual report that we do every year, and it lists everybody who's contributed any amount of money at all to the center, and there is still an opportunity to do so. And there's a contribution form on the table, and we thank you all so much for the support for these breakfasts and for these programs. I also want to thank Brian Kasuba, Associate Director of the Center, Lillian Valle Santiago, Jesse Deno, Doris L. Rodriguez, our fellow, and Mayvi, our student fellow, and we're delighted that they're helpful, and then all of the law school people. The staff of the law school has been superb putting together these breakfasts, and we have to thank them for making this so pleasant an event. I'd like to now call to the podium President and Dean of our law school, Anthony Crowell.
Thanks so much, Ross, and welcome to all of you. I'm thrilled to be here, not just because you're here, but because I had a 23-hour round trip to Washington yesterday because of derailments and delays and whatnot. I literally was up 23 hours straight, down and back, but I'm thrilled to be here, and it was a lot of fun. And at least we can really celebrate civic fame. I don't know in Washington these days that there'll be too much civic fame generated, but something's being generated. Anyway, we had a very interesting day yesterday, celebrating a lot of the great work of the law school. Today is certainly celebrating our law school, but also celebrating the great work of so many of our colleagues in city government, and really celebrating what the city achieves every day, not just for all New Yorkers, but really as a role model for cities and governing bodies around the world. So it's really quite extraordinary to be here. Certainly want to thank Ross for his extraordinary contributions to this institution in creating the Center for New York City Law. And I want to give a very special recognition to our board chair, Arthur Abbey, who is here, along with Diane Abbey, his spouse, who together have done so much to build this institution in its modern form. And we are extremely proud of what we do here, and it's all because of you. So thank you, Arthur and Diane. You know, I was at an event last week where a number of people were being honored, and I said, you know, sometimes I go to these events and I don't always know all the honorees for whatever reason, and it's nice to celebrate various achievements. But today I have a very distinct honor of knowing all of our honorees, and I've had the privilege, indeed a great privilege, of having worked with all of them in some way or another over the years. Judge Paul Crotty, and I have to give a special shout out to Judge Crotty, because Judge Crotty hired me into city government 22 years ago. It seems like yesterday. It does seem like yesterday. But certainly unforgettable opportunity that I was given to work at the law department and to be mentored and to grow into a city lawyer that did a lot of extraordinary things for the city, and I'm grateful for that opportunity and for having worked with you. Dick Condon, who has been nothing short of an extraordinary leader and visionary, and done so much for maintaining public integrity and giving us confidence in so many government institutions. So thank you, Dick, for all that work. Gene Rushinoff, who is an old friend and somebody whose leadership and spirit and belief in government and belief in people has been a guiding light for so many of us. And you've kept government good, and you keep us honest. And mostly, it always reverts back. and Dennis Walcott, with whom I worked for so many years in the Bloomberg bullpen and who has been a great friend and mentor and somebody who has a steady hand and steady leadership and always knows the right things. It's incredible, cool in midst of storms, and I admire that, and Dennis taught me a lot about maintaining that. And we're honoring someone additionally this year who we actually honored last year but couldn't be here, Susan Hinkson. Susan Hinkson is and a two-time alumna of this institution, also a member of our Board of Trustees, and we awarded her the Civic Fame Award last year, but she couldn't make it, so we're going to give it to her this year more formally. But as you know, Susan most recently served as Vice Chair of the Board of Standards and Appeals for a number of years, and now is in private consulting practice. So Susan has been a great friend and a great leader for the city's built environment for decades, so we celebrate that. So without any further ado, let me ask Ross to come back up, and we have the distinct honor of having Errol Louis here today, who I think is, we're talking about civic fame, but I think he is the civic conscience, and you keep us honest too, Errol, and Errol is ubiquitous. We can see him every night on New York One, but also on CNN. I think I was watching CNN, if I'm not mistaken, last Sunday morning. It was really early, and I think you might have even been at home doing it from Skype or something, and I'm just like, does this man ever sleep? So it's great, and we're so happy and proud that you're here and have been a great partner and voice for this program, which is really about celebrating our city. So thank you all for being here today, and I look forward to today's program. Ross.
We have so many things to do today. I'm just going to call Errol Louis up to the podium. This is the third time he's done it. It's a tradition for him to come here and speak truth to this group and to the world. So we're delighted that he's here. Errol, come up.
Thank you very much, and good morning to all of you. Thank you, Ross, for extending the invitation and working out all the details. And certainly congratulations to all of this morning's awardees, people who I read about long before I was in a position to write and report about them. And I'm talking about Richard Condon and Judge Crotty, Gene Rushinoff, and my friend Dennis Walcott. I also want to thank everybody here for your support of New York One News and for Inside City Hall. We do not take any of this for granted. I certainly am very grateful for the support. We recently added 2 million households to our footprint through an arrangement with Altice, also known as Optimum or Cablevision. Your friends outside of the city should know, your friends and family, that we're now seen in Nassau, Suffolk, and Westchester on Channel 98 for people who have Optimum. And we're also on throughout New Jersey and so forth. So I don't get a chance to speak to you very often. I think the last time I spoke from this podium was a couple of years ago. But you have enough reach and depth and history, and many of you have been following some of the stories we've been developing. And so I wanted to pick up on one of them that I think is more important than all of the rest, and one that doesn't get enough attention. So we've recently marked the 50th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act of 1968, which was passed into law as cities were literally burning 4 days after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. New York, thankfully, did not endure the worst of that time. But I think we need to challenge ourselves to desegregate New York City. I talked about this on the air. You might have seen it. I visited Memphis for that 50th anniversary and was startled when we went to the National Civil Rights Museum, which is inside the Lorraine Hotel. They refurbished it and converted it. There's all kinds of exhibits about African-American history, the civil rights movement, and so forth. And we're looking. I brought my son with me. We're looking at the sort of bus from Montgomery, Alabama that Rosa Parks was in. They have a replica of the cell that Dr. King was in when he wrote the famous letter. And then they had this section about Jim Crow, the pernicious practice of Jim Crow. And they had a little sign, a little exhibit saying, Jim Crow today. And they had maps of different cities, and New York City was right there. And it showed the housing patterns that identify us as, to this day, one of the most racially segregated cities in America. New Yorkers, black New Yorkers, make up 23% of the overall population of the city, but are less than 5% of the population in 17 of the community boards. Latinos are 29% of the city, less than 10% of the total in 10 different community boards. And so, as many of us know, the diversity that we see in the cities and in the parks and in the streets is a little bit of an illusion, because when you map where we go home at night, most of us are living in neighborhoods that are either less than 10% black or less than 10% white. And this then flows into the public school system, of course, where the UCLA Civil Rights Project, as the New York Times recently noted, we have some of the most segregated schools in the system, with 85% of black students and 75% of Latino students attending what are called intensely segregated schools, meaning less than 10% white. And I am embarrassed by that. I don't know how you feel about it. I think it is a source of great distress. It is not supposed to be this way. I think it really makes a mockery of the mayor's vision of creating the fairest big city in America. I don't think you can have a city that is both progressive and also racially segregated. It distorts the housing prices in the marketplace, many of you know. I grew up in Westchester and New Rochelle, and there is a reason that the home prices and the taxes are so high in those suburbs. There are actually some hard numbers out of Chicago and Philadelphia that show the actual effect, dollar by dollar, of segregation on the housing market. And so fair and racially segregated, I think we could all agree, don't belong in the same sentence and don't belong in the greatest city in the world. However, there are some changes, and that's the bad news. The good news is there's some changes that actually I think of as relatively low-hanging fruit. Now, I will tell you, I have a history for about 30 years now, of saying, well, we can just make a couple of changes, everything will be fine. All we have to do is, and 30 years later, still working on the same issues. And one of the things I've learned from Dennis Walcott and others of you who are here, Gene Rushinoff in particular, is persistence and patience. We may have to, outweight the SOBs, as one of my mentors told me. But in this case, I want to throw some things out at you and invite you to join me in pushing for just a couple of small things that I think could help us desegregate the city. The low-hanging fruit, I think, should start with affirmatively furthering fair housing. Some of you know that is language that comes straight out of HUD and a number of other federal agencies. Affirmatively furthering fair housing is not just a box to check off. It should be part of a serious plan. I was startled to see in a lawsuit against the city, there were some depositions by high-ranking officials of the de Blasio administration who acknowledged under oath that it is not a priority, that there is no particular plan to desegregate the city or to address segregation in the affordable housing plan. So if we're going to bring 300,000 new units on and there's no plan to address what effect this might have or not have on our current housing patterns, that's not a good thing. So even just as a broad aspirational policy, that should, I think, be front and center. A little bit more controversial, and Judge Crotty, your son, has told me I'm wrong about this, and I've explained to him why he's wrong about this. But there is a politically popular practice of running our affordable housing lotteries that give 50% preference to people living in a particular community board. I think I've argued about this with Zach Carter as well. You're all wrong. You could call it community preference, which I think is the name, or you could call it outsider exclusion, which is really how it actually functions. Right now, if two people of identical low incomes are applying for the same handful of affordable units, preference will go to the applicant who arrived as recently as 90 days before the opening of the lottery for that building. The second applicant might live only a few blocks away. The second applicant might have jobs, roots, relatives in the area that go back decades, but they would arbitrarily be deemed not from the community, and they would be placed at a severe disadvantage in the lottery. In my opinion, the fair and logical method would be to let any income-eligible family from anywhere in the city apply for any new affordable housing. Instead of one big housing lottery for all needy families, we're currently running 59 separate ones, which is a formula for maintaining segregated neighborhoods, intentionally or not. I think so I think that would be a good first start. I spoke about it yesterday with the Speaker of the City Council, who said he agreed with me that there's no particular magic to 50% outsider exclusion preferences. You could make it 30%. You could make it 20%. I think it should be 0, but it certainly, I think, needs to be up for debate. Second point, I think it's long past time for the City Council to pass a law that would require co-ops to abide by the portion of fair housing law that requires an explanation of why they have turned down applicants seeking to purchase or rent units. Right now we have 300,000 co-ops that are essentially outside of the scope of that. They can reject would-be buyers without explanation. We don't know the extent to which personal whims, religious or racial animosity or bias is part of that whole practice. For at least a decade, a bill to apply fair housing requirements to co-ops has languished in one city council committee or another. It has never come up for a vote. And as long as that remains the case, we will continue to have a deeply segregated city. And then finally, the schools. It's been in the news a little bit lately. There is a startling and, in my opinion, unfortunate tendency for many families and progressive leaders to simply wall off their children from those kids who are having trouble, who are coming from low-income communities, who are maybe not scoring as high on standardized tests as they could if they were able to take advantage of expensive private tutoring. And we don't have a lot of leadership on this at this point. There have been long delays. There's been a marked refusal to use the word segregation. City Hall has begun to put together a plan, a voluntary one, that I think doesn't show much promise, not nearly as aggressive as it could be. The good news here, however, is that there's a growing number of parents and some voices in the media and other leaders who are prepared to take matters into their own hands and insist that we stop pretending that the city can be progressive and racially segregated, and stop pretending that it's okay to use some set of standards for admission to, say, desirable middle schools that we know are going to exclude people from the very same community who would otherwise have a chance to enter and to thrive. So that's what I had to say this morning. I hope that you will join me in pressing to make sure that we create a city that is not just more affordable, but also more fair and less divided than we found it. My son is 12. I would consider it a mark of personal defeat and, again, some embarrassment if he is standing at this podium in 20 years saying the same thing, like, gee, how did we get to be such a divided city? You all know better than I do the amount of work that's involved in politics and in regulation and in law to make some of this come about. But I am all in, and I'm ready to get to work. And if you ever want to talk about any of these issues with me, I am definitely all ears. Thank you very much.
Errol Lewis challenged us a year ago that if you're unhappy with politics, you should become a candidate. Today he's challenged us, if you want to be a fair city, you have to do it. And we thank you for that. We'll have maybe 10 minutes of questions, people, or comments. We always open up the microphone. As part of what we do here is open a microphone for people to have an opportunity to speak. Let's just a few minutes, and again, please go to the microphone. That's the way we'll do it. So let's start here and go very quickly, and please short comments and short.
Hello.
So we're going to cut this off in 10 minutes.
Hi, Errol.
Hi, Tom.
Thomas Lopez Pierre. I'm a candidate for City Council up in Manhattan, and I finance affordable housing in the outer boroughs. My question for you, Errol, is the 50% rule in terms of requiring local people to be in terms of affordable housing is very important for Black and Hispanic neighborhoods. I disagree with your premise that it should be opened up because it would just open up a great deal of further gentrification of having more white people come into black and Hispanic neighborhoods, which I would be opposed to. We need to protect our neighborhoods. And secondly, the political equation would change for black and Hispanic candidates by having an overabundance of white people in their district.
Got it.
And so those are two reasons why I
Okay.
oppose it.
No, I got it. Look.
And so I just want to hear your thoughts. Thank
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Look, the easiest example I think to use that everybody instinctively understands is the way we provision this city as far as food every single day for 8+ million people, food from all over the world. It all just gets here somehow, right? People have connections. If you talk to anybody here about your personal connections, your kids' personal connections, who they married, where they live, where they work, where they go to school, everybody's involved in this great urban ballet that Jane Jacobs used to talk about, right? And it is, I think, not just reductive, but simply wrong, just factually wrong to say that because I was born in the Manhattanville projects in West Harlem, there I have some deep roots that exist forever, you know? I mean, I married a girl from Florida who lived in another part of Brooklyn. My dad, lifelong Harlemite, born in Harlem, went to Boys High, had ties in Brooklyn, bought a house in Brooklyn that I live in now. You can't reduce it to this kind of simplistic, once you not even own, but rent. You rent in a particular neighborhood. 90 days later, you now have acquired some kind of property right. I mean, it's, you know, essentially what it is. You've got some proprietary right to stay in that community board, not 2 blocks away in the next community board, but this community board, you know, forever, and to the exclusion of other people. I just don't buy it. It just doesn't make any sense. As for the rest of it, I don't believe in you know, you and I have talked about this, Thomas. There's this there's a black nationalist dream, I would call it fantasy, that goes back for quite a long time, that, you know, an all-black segregated neighborhood with its own leadership and its own institutions and its own economy can thrive. I'd say it hasn't really worked. I've seen it in action in different places where mentally for me, where I knew that dream was not for me, was when I visited a sovereign Indian nation, you know, and they had land, the Pine Ridge Reservation. It was the size of Connecticut. Huge, their own schools, their own courts, their own everything, the land and everything else. It was one of the poorest areas in the country. You know, in fact, driving through it, if you've ever seen Indian housing, those of you who have HUD experience of this kind, you're driving through this big, empty, beautiful, gorgeous rural landscape, and then there's like a housing project in the middle of it. It's like, how did they do that? What is this? So I just disagree. You know, and frankly, the fear of gentrification and of diversity coming, say, to Harlem, you know, it's going to happen. And actually, if you look up the Harlem Real Estate Board, who created it and why, you know, the Harlem Real Estate Board was created when Harlem was white, by white real estate interests to keep folks out. That didn't work. What you're suggesting, I don't think would work either. So, yes.
Well, thank you for honoring Gene Rushinoff. He should have gotten this award years ago. He wasn't as nasty as me MTA-wise, but he had, you know, shared our concerns. And to Dennis Walcott, to this day, I still can't open XPS files at Queens Libraries. I've mentioned this to you at least twice in the last 2 years, and so far nothing has changed. Via Microsoft XPS document writer.
Okay.
Errol, as one of 2 journalists who hosts the Mayor Weekly, the other one being at 10 o'clock on Brian Lair, what do you think of Mayor de Blasio's relationship with the press?
Wow. Well, I would say on one level, I'd say my opinion of that has changed. Once he decided to sit with me once a week, I said, well, it's about as good as it needs to be. It's not what I would prefer. I like the old Kochian kind of daily jousting with the media that Bloomberg continued. Even Rudy did sort of more of it. If you like light rather than heat, the daily jousting is probably not such a great idea. So you could kind of, you could kind of flip a coin. If you watch any of that stuff, and you guys do, this is a very politically active and savvy crowd. There are some mayors who draw energy from that daily interaction with the media. Koch lived on it. I mean, literally. But then there are some people, and I think the mayor happens to be one of them, who get irritated by it. He's got important stuff to do. It doesn't work for him. It doesn't work for him. Let's just put it that way. It doesn't seem to work for him. He prefers to do it in a different kind of a setting. I am pleased and proud that our show is one of those kinds of settings. Because if you had to reduce it to sort of simple branding, both for the Brian Lehrer Show and for Inside City Hall, I would reduce it to sort of smart talk for smart people, right? Like, we try not to do too much sort of foolishness. Wednesdays are an exception, but we try to we try to keep it smart, relevant, newsworthy, timely. If you watch on social media, I get a lot of blowback. Why did you let him get away with that? Why didn't you ask him this? Why didn't you ask him that? It's like, because starting an argument is the easiest thing in the world to do in New York. You can do that 24 hours a day. Having a conversation where you actually draw out some information and maybe exchange views is a little bit different. And so I think we'll know better at the end when we look back what his relationship with the press was like. But certainly he has ruffled a lot of feathers, again, by not doing a lot of press organizations. They rent that space in room 9, or they pay for it, and it's costly to have somebody sit there all day. And they have done it with the expectation that this would follow the old pattern that goes back to the 1970s of a daily interaction with the mayor. So I think the fact that that's not happening, along with the very troubled business environment for the media, has put a lot more pressure on it. That, plus the fact that it doesn't seem to jibe with the mayor's style, has caused a certain amount of unhappiness. Yeah.
I'm sorry, we're going to have to curtail the questions because we have to go on to the awards ceremony. I apologize to those standing. We only had a brief question period. Thank you for Errol Lewis for terrific, and thank you for the good questions and for the really responsive comments. Now we're going to turn to the awards, Civic Fame Awards ceremony. I ask my colleague, Dean Crowell, to come up and help on this, and I'm going to go through a little discussion. We'll do this in alphabetical order, starting with Richard Condon, Dick Condon. I want to say two things about all of the awardees, and I think you'll see this in the things we have to say, but also in the reasons for the awards. All 4 of the awards we're giving this year are for people who are really the long-distance runners in civic life. 40, 50, even 60 years of participation in the civic life of this city in ways that are just so remarkable. And the second thing is that each one of them took on the major problem of their day and attacked that major problem. And that is between the length of service and the participation in the major concerns of the day really mark all 4 of these careers. So we're going to start first with Dick Condon. For him, the issue was corruption. He joined the police force in 1957, age 21. 1957, a long time ago. And as he rose in the ranks, the issue of the day was corruption. We move into, in the 1972, is the Knapp Commission, which detailed the corruption of the earlier, predates 1972. It's the era of Serpico, of Prince of the City, of major corruption associated with drugs. And that was the police force that Dick Condon was in, and he was among those who fought against the corruption. He left the police force in 1976 after 19 years to move to head the investigations for the special prosecutor against corruption in the criminal justice system. And he was there from 1976 to 1982. In 1982-83, he was Deputy Criminal Justice Coordinator in City Hall, and then 83 to 86, Commissioner of the State Division of Criminal Justice Services. He had his career in the department was focused on the issue of the day of the corruption. He came in 1995 when he was in private service, private practice. He came to New York Law School, a symposium we had on police corruption, and his remarks then, which were then published in our law review, said in no uncertain terms that what was needed was an independent investigative force if we're going to stamp out the corruption in the police department, an unusual position for somebody who had come up through the police department. He came back to government in 2002 as a special commissioner of investigation for the New York City School District, and for 15 years served in that position, doing, again, investigations into corruption in the Department of Education that ran from the reports on the FTA scandal of $57 million fraud to management issues, for instance, the disappearance and death of Avante Oquendo, a 14-year-old autistic ninth grader who left the school and ultimately passed away, died. He was sworn in as police commissioner in 1989. In October of 1989. And I was fortunate enough to be in the room when he was sworn in and to hear him speak about policing and about corruption and how important the police department is and the role of the police department in maintaining the civility and the civilization, the civility of the city. And I asked him if he had a copy of that speech, and he sent it to me. And I just wanted to read a little bit about it, both as to how his feelings for the police department and the role. He says, "The history of this department is not unblemished, for corruption and brutality and racism have from time to time been a part of that history. But another part of our history is that there have always been good men and women in the department who were willing to fight these evils, who understood the accolade New York's finest was not an empty phrase, but had been earned by generations of brave and decent police officers, and I believe that today they are in the vast majority." And then he went on, "Another aspect of this tradition is that we are the most public of agencies. We are sworn in and promoted at public ceremonies. We wear uniforms when we work. On those uniforms are numbered shields and nameplates. There is a civilian complaint review board, an internal affairs division, and a special prosecutor's office, and 5 district attorneys, and 2 United States attorneys' offices that oversee our activities. We do not privately censor, but publicly charge, and when necessary, suspend those who fail to meet our standards. We publicly try and publicly dismiss police officers found guilty of serious violations of our rules or of the law. And finally, when police officers die in the line of duty, we bury them at a public ceremony." This is from the speech, and he went on to again talk about the role of the police officer in maintaining a civil society. For nearly 60 years of public service, we call to award the Civic Fame Award to Richard Condon, Dick Condon. Dick? It says, "To Richard J. Condon for his outstanding career in law enforcement, where he set the standard for civility, fairness, and professionalism as a police officer, police commissioner, special commissioner of investigation for New York City schools, and commissioner of New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services."
Thank you, Ross, and thank you, Anthony, and thank all of my friends and associates, people I've worked with over the years for coming here. There's 3 things that help you in this business. One is having worked for good people, and I work for some of the best people in the city and state of New York. Governor Mario Cuomo, Judge John Keenan, Mayor Ed Koch, Mayor Bloomberg, Rose Gilhern when she was Commissioner of Investigation. That's a very important aspect of your career, is to be working for very good people. The second aspect is to be working with very good people. And all my associates in all the different agencies that I worked with, for all these years were always helpful. The prosecutors, the police officers, the other criminal justice agencies, they all learned how to cooperate and to do things well. And the last thing is the people who work for you. And I have been blessed in every agency that I ever worked. I always had good people working for me at the highest levels and at the lowest levels. And I want to thank all of them, and thank you again.
Papers for Paul. The next awardee and long-distance runner for civic fame is Paul Crotty. To speak about Paul, though, I thought you have to start with his family. His father was a lawyer, 3 of his siblings are lawyers, 2 of his uncles are lawyers, and his father started him off in politics really early. His father worked at the NLRB and during the Roosevelt administration, was elected to the president of the Buffalo City Council, ran for mayor, ran for state attorney general, was a delegate to the 1967 state constitutional convention where he brought Paul, who had just graduated law school from Cornell in 1967, and Paul was anxious to be at the Constitutional Convention. Not only was it really an important event, but also he could be near Jane, who was also living in the area. His then wife became his wife. He clerked for Judge Lloyd McMahon of the Southern District, and one of his fellow clerks was Rudy Giuliani. He moved to private practice to Donovan Leisure, and in 1984 came into government. And 1984 was the tail end of the fiscal crisis. It was still the issue whether the city was going to be able to actually govern itself financially. And other major issue at the time was housing. And Paul worked on both of those areas. First as became the Commissioner of Finance and stood for fiscal integrity of the city, but then moved to the Commissioner of HPD, Housing Preservation and Development. And that was, in some ways, the greatest legacy of the Koch administration. 50,000 units of housing, the INREM inventory the city had was turned into residential units, a $5 billion program Paul led, and that program was carried forward into the Dinkins and Giuliani administration and was one of the great legacies of that era that produced housing, residential housing in a city that desperately needed that. Back to private practice, and then Giuliani brings him back into government as corporation counsel, where the issue of the day again was governance. And there Paul had a stellar record in litigation. Some of the cases, the PBA case, the Police Benevolent Association tried to run out from under the city labor laws, got legislation passed in the state legislature, and Paul litigated, and it's the only case that I'm aware of where the theory of violation of the Home Rule Amendment of the state constitution prevailed, and Paul litigated that all the way to the Court of Appeals. It's a singular victory, then overturned the next year by the legislature, who figured out how to do it after Paul had beaten them in court. He also did an amazing bit of litigation in the Agostino-Felton case in the Supreme Court, a 5-4 victory. He argued that allowed federal funds to be used for special education children in the city schools. Otherwise, federal funds could not be used. Also was a period of trying to figure out the relationship between the city council and the mayor, and the major litigation Paul led in that, including over the Mullen Commission was recommendations concerning police corruption. He was always helpful here at the Center for New York City Law. As I said, he was the very first speaker in our City Law Breakfast Series in 1994, September 30, 1994. He's been on our advisory council. He's been taking part in symposium. And particularly on the history of the law department, which resulted in not 1 but 2 articles in our law review on the issue of the law department. And he has been helpful financially all along in sustaining the center. As he became federal district judge in 2005, and had major cases there. One where he overturned the city's requirement under Mayor Bloomberg to have hybrid cabs on the city, which led to tabloid headlines such as "Judge gives red light to green cabs." He also forced the overturned the state legislation of limiting this number is just boggles my $150,000 per contributor to super PACs, and they're an unusual opinion because it's so personal. It's such a personal opinion. So I went and looked at the opinion. Let me just read a little bit of this opinion that is called New York Progress and Protective PAC versus Walsh. And Judge Crotty felt he had to overturn the state legislation under Citizens United. And so he writes, and this, when you think about this, think about his father and all the politics and being in government and a government person and thinking about government. He writes, "Today's reality is that the voices of we the people are too often drowned out by the few who have great resources. And when the fundraising cycle slows, it never stops. Lobbyists take over in a continuing attempt to gain influence over and access to elected officials. This is not a left or right, liberal or conservative analysis, but all the points on the political spectrum are increasingly involved in shaping this country's political agenda. In today's never-ending cycle of campaigning and lobbying and campaigning, elected officials know where their money is coming from and that it must keep coming if they are to stay in office. Ordinary citizens recognize this. They know what is going on. They know that they are not being included. It breeds cynicism and distrust." And then Judge Crotty quotes, "Exodus, a bribe blinds the clear-sighted and is the ruin of a just man's cause." These are the words of a judge who likes to write and write his own opinions, and for all of these, for the over almost 60 years of civic life and civic involvement in our government, for law, for wisdom as a judge, we are honored to present the Civic Fame Award to Paul Crotty. The certificate reads, "For Paul Crotty, for his productive advocacy for affordable housing as Commissioner of the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development, for his insistence on fiscal stability as Commissioner of Finance, and for his wisdom and support for the rule of law as Corporation Counsel and U.S. District Judge."
Well, I'm honored to receive this award and to join the distinguished predecessors who've also received the award. I'd like to tell you something that I've learned in my career in public service, and that is you accomplish far more when you work collaboratively than you do when you work adversarially. So I've always tried to collaborate. I've been blessed with the getting opportunities for the good offices of Mayor Koch, good office of Mayor Giuliani. My current position is due to the hard work of Senator Schumer, and I'm very appreciative. I appreciate all the work that I've been able to do because of the good men and women that I've been privileged to work with. I'm very appreciative of the support, and none of this is possible without the love and support of your family. So I'm very much indebted to my family, and I thank each and every one of you for your help in my efforts to make this city a better city. I would like to say one thing, based on my experience as Commissioner of Housing, and dealing with the aspects of community control, that community preferences are, regardless of what you think of them, Earl, they are a fact of life, and they're going to continue. And if they don't continue, you won't have housing in a lot of these areas which desperately need housing. So the debate goes on, but as I say, it's a worthy topic of debate, and you can accomplish a lot more if you work collaboratively rather than through the court system and adversity. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, Your Honor, sit down. You may be seated, Your Honor. The next in alphabetical order, Gene Rushinoff, a truly long-distance runner, an entire career in public service, and we are so honored to present you with the Civic Fame Award. Graduated from Brooklyn College, Harvard Law School, and when he left Harvard Law School, the first job he had was New York PIRG, and NYPIRG, and he started the Strap Hangers campaign. Now, the issue of the day was public transportation. I know people complain about the subways today, but if you were in the subways in the 60s, the doors didn't open, the lights didn't go on, it was dirt, graffiti everywhere, the cars never came, delays, it was awful. And so it was the biggest issue, and that's the issue that Gene took on. And there was no data. So he figured out a way to get data. He had college students stand in the subways, count the cars without lights, without doors, and issue a scorecard. And that was the first data we had about how bad it was, other than the anecdotes about your train never came. And so the scorecard, and it still continues to this day. If you go on the Strap Hangers website, you'll see the scorecard very beautifully done and with incredible data, line by line, almost car by car. It's fabulous. He created the Pokey Award for the slowest bus routes, the Schleppy Award for the worst bus bunching. He was outside demonstrating constantly, and then when he got finished demonstrating, he was invited in because he was the most constructive voice as an advocate on public transit. Robert Kiley said, even when he made my life miserable, I always thought of Gene as being very constructive. Dick Ravitch said, he picketed me in my office. He picketed me at home. But I said, but no one did more to improve subways than Gene Rushinoff. And that continues to this day. And I know when I was commissioner, he picketed me. But then I said, what? Oh, what? Now you tell me.
Didn't feel that way then.
Yeah. But he would come in and we would have this sort of private kitchen cabinets, and he was the leader of that, and that's the way he's operated, both as on the public side, but also anybody in power in these institutions knew that they could talk to him and they would get good advice. He also, the other topic that besides public transit he's stood for from the very beginning was public integrity, ethics, and government. He was the leading spokesman for campaign finance in 1988-89 from the public side at the time of the Charter Revision Commissions. And in 1988, the Times quotes him, and this gives you an idea of, he's very quotable, but he also is very tough. Here's the Times quote in 1988, "The campaign finance bill is an enormous test of Peter Vallone's leadership, personal. And if the bill fails, it is a very big problem, not just for the people who want campaign finance reform. It's a big problem for Peter Vallone and the council and the institution." And then in 2006, when the council was considering lobbying and the relationship to campaign finance, he said, "Campaign money is like water, it will go to the point of least resistance. That's why this glaring loophole should be filled." Another New York Times quote. And then when the Giuliani administration refused to, I don't blame you, Paul, refused to fund the Independent Budget Office, there was Gene again fighting for the Independent Budget Office, and the Times quotes him in 1995 as saying, "It's time for Mayor Giuliani and the council to stop breaking the law and start doing what the charter says, which is to fund the Independent Budget Office. They have shown a real contempt for the very clear mandate in the charter. And with City Hall making sweeping budget changes, we need the independent budget office more than ever." That was after 1998. Yeah, 1995 is when the time. That's the 1995. Yeah, Paul. I'm sorry. He's been a regular participant in our annual ethics conference, lecturing on campaign finance, on ethics. He's been a really important part of the center in New York Law School, and we thank him for that. He's been honored before, Revson Fellow, New York New Yorker of the Year, Common Cause. He has been a true long-distance runner, and one that I mean, all of us love the power of government and the being part of government. He's never actually been in government, but has accomplished so much. And for all of that, we're honored to present Gene Rushinoff with the Civic Fame Award. Where's the award?
It's official. I'm famous.
The award says for Gene Rushinoff for his 40 years of effective, imaginative, and innovative advocacy on behalf of the New York City's public transit riders and for his strong, persistent, and successful efforts to advance fairness in election campaigns and honesty in government service.
I see that I'm one of the few people who got the memo that spring has started. There are a couple of dressed for spring. I saw Steve Lewis out there who could spring outfit. And who else is here? Mr. X, how are you? Okay. I'm going to be pretty brief. First of all, that hardworking and smart woman who helped carry me up here is my wife, Pauline Toole. We've had two careers that have sort of paralleled each other, and she is the current director of the city's Department of Public Information Services, or DORS as it's called. Okay. Why do I do this work? Why did I stick around 40 years? That's a good question. There are two reasons I often offer. One is that my organization, the New York Public Interest Research Group, is composed of our activists, hardcore activists, all the college students, and many CUNY chapters in New York. You see what those students are doing down at Stoneman Douglas High School in Florida now. It really makes you optimistic about the future, and working with young people is a great thing. The other reason why I stuck around is because of the Dennis Walcott's world. Where are you, Dennis? Hey, you're not wearing your spring outfit. You're gonna have to change. Dennis and I had a wild ride back in 1995 when we sued the MTA for trying to raise the fare from $1.25 to $1.50. Remember those days? I do. It was really a tremendous learning experience for me about city government, and I followed that as his career since then, and he made many contributions to New York. We learned a lot about city government. We made a difference. And in that case, it's really interesting. We lost in court. That happens. You don't always win. You know that, Judge Crowdy. But we really created a tremendous political deficit for the then governor, whose name I will not mention. And as a direct result of those efforts, the people in New York who use unlimited ride passes, billions of them, benefited from this new system. So anyway, I appreciate being honored, and thank you very much.
And now, Dennis Walcott, another of the really long-distance runners of the city, and again addressing major issues of his time and doing it with such success and such persistence. Dennis Walcott, son of immigrants from Barbados and St. Croix, native of Queens and the public schools, Francis Lewis High School. When he was appointed as chancellor, he talked a little bit about his background in the Times, and so he said that he grew up in Adderley Park, southeast Queens, and that it was backyard baseball with tree stump for home plate, trombone at the school orchestra, biking down the street under the watchful eyes of friendly neighbors. And then he said it was like Leave It to Beaver, only black. He comes back to New York City, a master's degree, bachelor and master's degree, and steps right into public advocacies on things that really mattered. He worked on kindergarten children at Amistad's Child Care and Family Center in South Jamaica, and then foster care. Now, this is the era of one of the issues in social area that was so dramatically and such a big issue when he was coming into civic life was foster care. At that time, it was the era of the Wilder litigation, of the time when black foster care children did not get very good care. It was also a time of HIV/AIDS and the difficulty of such things as border babies, something we don't hear about. Border babies were babies left in hospitals by their mothers. They either had HIV or drug-related issues, and the mothers just simply left them, and they were called border babies. Well, that was the time that Dennis founded the Harlem Downey Children's Services, the first black-run adoption agency in New York, working on foster care and AIDS, and one day alone he placed 30 border babies in foster homes from Harlem Hospital. It's hard to imagine how difficult that work was and what an important part of the work that he was doing. In 1990, he moved to the Urban League, running the Urban League, and continued the work on infant mortality, training welfare recipients, coaching parents to get involved in schools, always involved with education, and then the issues of police brutality, another issue that was very much in the news at that period of time. In 1993, Mayor Dinkins appointed him to the Board of Education as a member. In 1994 to 2001, when he was at the Urban League, the issue of police and policing was a major issue. That was the era of the Mullen Commission, and he was working through the Urban League with the police department and is credited, and this is just amazing to me, he was credited with actually writing the police slogan, which you see on all the police cars: courtesy, professionalism, and respect. That stands for a lot, and that's still the slogan of the police department. In 2002, became deputy mayor in the Bloomberg administration, where he clearly became the linchpin holding together the leadership at the Department of Education, Joel Klein, and the City Hall, and the demands of the public. He was the peacemaker, the consensus builder, the person who had the calm voice and brought people together and made sure that the issues got resolved and that operations continued. He was indispensable to the mayor and the Department of Education. Following the very short tenure of Catherine Black in 2011, Mayor Bloomberg appointed him as chancellor, again stepping into what was a very acrimonious circumstance. And he said, he's quoted as saying his goal was to end the anger and acrimony in the politics of the Department of Education, which he did, continued to improve education for the city of New York. His tenure might be summed up by the same slogan he wrote for the police department: courtesy, professionalism, and respect. After leaving, he became now the CEO of the Queens Library, where he is continuing his work in education, children, and working for the betterment of the city. For 44 years of engaged and super service for the city of New York, we're honored to present the Civic Fame Award to Dennis Walcott. Is that okay? Yeah, that's good. We'll take a picture.
Yep.
read it. It says to Dennis Walcott for his outstanding contributions and determination to bring quality education to the children of the City of New York while serving as Urban League President, Deputy Mayor, School Chancellor, and President of the Queens Library.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Russ, and to Anthony. It's a pleasure, and to the other honorees, congratulations to you. A special relationship with all of them in a variety of different ways. With Gene, as Gene indicated, we sued. The one thing you said somewhat incorrectly, we won for one day. One day, Judge Robert Patterson agreed with us, and then the Court of Appeals just overruled us. But it was a moment in history that to this day I am very proud of. And to the judge, it's always a pleasure. We work together in a variety of different ways, but more importantly, with your son, who always drove me crazy at City Hall, and it was an honor there. To Dick Condon. So think about it. Dick's job and my job. Chancellor, Special Commissioner of Investigation. So we had a great relationship because the relationship was both professional, but more importantly, Dick and I knew each other because it's a small world in that when you talk about the Mullen Commission, when you talk about Knapp Commission, when you really put it all together, the person who was my general counsel at the Urban League was Michael Armstrong. And then Michael Armstrong's connection to, oh, you didn't know that? Oh, see, there's a lot you didn't know. And so, hold on, I'll give you one more factoid and I'll be really quick. So Michael Armstrong was my GC at the Urban League, and Michael allowed our firm at that time, Lord Day Lord Barrett and Smith, to represent us. And we had a hotshot lawyer who was our point person. So you ready for another fact that you didn't know? That hotshot lawyer who represented us is now the State Attorney General, Eric Schneiderman. So Eric was the point person in that regard, representing us. So all these facts together with Dick, I had a great relationship, and with all the people, it's just been a fantastic relationship. I just want to pick up on one point. I'm here, but the reality is I'm as a result of both my family at home, but more importantly, the people that I work with. I have people here from Queens Public Library, both from my board as well as the staff who are here. They are great in my life at the Department of Education, a fantastic relationship. And I'm going to invoke one name, get in trouble, but it's well worth getting in trouble, and that's Kathleen Grimm. Kathleen, my heart and soul. Kathleen's sister, I think, is still here. There she is over there. And I think the world of Kathleen. I love Kathleen. She was straight up. If I had my tie off like some of the people who are lawyers in this room right now, Kathleen would let us know about it in 2 seconds. So Kathleen, we miss you dearly. And my final closing remark is that this would not be possible without all of you as well. This is what New York City is about. It's about public service. It's the constant giving of yourself to make life better for others. And to that, I say thank you to all of you, but more importantly, thank you for this award, and thank you to the Queens Public Library staff. Thank you.
All right. Okay. As you know, for those of you who were here last year, we did a little more of a formal presentation, but we'll do a little shorthand. But we certainly are thrilled that Susan Hinkson is here. And it's a very interesting lead-in that Dennis brings up Kathleen Grimm, because Kathleen Grimm, as I think most of you know, was one of our most prominent alumna of this institution and served on our Board of Trustees for several decades and was just an extraordinary presence and builder in this community. And we lost her in 2015, and it was a devastating loss on so many levels, a devastating loss for the city, for the law school, and I think for those who seek to really make this city better through personal achievement and education. And one of the nicest things we have done since her passing, is appoint Susan Hinkson to the board. And she, in some ways, you're filling the seat that Kathleen held because she was our guide in public service. And she really had an extraordinary presence. And Susan brings that extraordinary presence. For those of you who know Susan, you know that she has been probably one of the foremost leaders in bringing architecture and land use expertise and code and law to life, and often a steady presence in everything she's done. One of the things that we're really proud of at New York Law School right now is that, and this was different when Susan was a student here twice, is the presence of women in our student body. Our student body is comprised of 60% women. And Susan entered not only the profession, but certainly her earlier life after graduating from Pratt with a degree in architecture. She entered professions where women were wholly underrepresented, where women had to fight for a voice at the table. And we're really excited and proud to have her voice at our table every day at the law school. And I think that city government has been better for her extraordinary service as Brooklyn Buildings Commissioner, as Vice Chair of the Board of Standards and Appeals, in institutions that have been historically male-dominated, that have been very difficult to penetrate and to lead. And she has done it with such immense aplomb and immense, I think, grace and skill and effectiveness. And I don't think I've ever seen you not have a very patient approach, but I think you always win. You are, it's sort of like this amazing, I think it's an amazing grit and tenacity and patience, and I think your intelligence, your intellect, and your ability to navigate both a highly technical world, a male-dominated world, and a world in which you see a goal and you understand how we can make the world better through what we do in public service. It's been a pleasure to not only work with you, but to be your friend for the past, I think, like 12 years, at least. I think maybe more. No, I think maybe 14 years. And it's been wonderful. So we want to welcome you up here to accept this award, and it's personal, and it's also on behalf of the whole city. So.
We just read the award. It says Susan Hinkson for her extraordinary service as Brooklyn Buildings Commissioner and as Vice Chair and Commissioner of the Board of Standards and Appeal, where with an architect's eye and a lawyer's skill, she inspired an even more beautiful and livable city.
Thank you. Well, my goodness. Thank you very much. I'm very appreciative of this award. So many people in this room, I know, and have helped me along the way. I've always believed in the power of the individual to have a positive effect on the collective, and I think it's important that each and every one of us find that within themselves to be a power for good for our society. And I am hopeful that and grateful to many of you for helping me, I hope, to have done just that. So thank you very much.
Well, I want to This brings to conclusion the annual Civic Fame Award for 2018. We want to thank everyone who came today. We want to thank the award winners. We want to thank the law school for doing this. This is, for us, a great event, and I hope that all of you come away inspired. 40, 50, 60 years of civic life, very important, and for the city, for all of us, thank you for being a part of these awards today. Thank you.
Yes, everybody can
Oh, can we have all the honorees to have one photo? We'd like to have one photo with all the honorees.